Our latest news alert has us talking once again about China, so we hope Stephen Lieb has made it a fair distance from the studio after that last segment. Good to have Stephen back, my goodness. Now, the nuclear summit, remember Peter Barnes was reporting on it last hour, and he said that President Obama would be meeting with the Chinese president. Amid that, we have reports that China is set to deploy long-range missiles capable of reaching the United States. So we bring in former Army Special Forces veteran, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, to talk about this. Lieutenant Colonel, how concerned, to what level of concern? This is one of these stories where the headline pops out at you and you say, my goodness, how concerned should we be about something like that?
Well, I'll tell you, Connell, thanks for having me on, first of all. Yeah. I mean, you should always be concerned when these kinds of headlines pop out. I think we just saw the other day that North Korea was doing similar saber rattling. And I think in this environment right now where the U.S. is perceived to be so weak, we can expect that. So I don't get overly concerned about it. I'll be honest with you. I get more concerned when I hear about the nuclear summit and the loose nuclear materials that are out there and the capacity of those things to fall in the hands of groups like ISIS. That's where I get actually more concerned about a nuclear threat than even a big nation state like China.
Right, that's what they're trying to do today, right? Cut down on that probability or possibility of those nuclear materials, as you say, getting into the obvious wrong hands. What are we not doing that we should be doing on that front?
Well, you know, I think the president's on the right track as far as trying to reduce the accessibility of those nuclear materials. However, I think it's faltering with President Putin not coming, and I think, they're perceiving him as a lame duck, and so I don't think he'll make many more gains. But I also think, as a pragmatist, as someone, a professional soldier, I believe we should make the assumption that many of these materials are accessible to groups out there, and that at some point, these things could be accessed. And I don't think we're doing enough there. I don't think we're taking this seriously. We're so busy following the antics of politics that I don't think we're really considering how serious ISIS is and their doomsday mindset to get their hands on something like this. Colin, they were surveying, two of these guys were surveilling nuclear facilities in Europe before the Brussels attack happened.
And that's the real threat, right? Because we hear, you said earlier, for example, that we are perceived to be weak, meaning the Obama administration, I presume. So even if that's the case, the threat of a nation state, somebody, like China, we were talking about China, actually firing a missile at the United States, that's not so much a threat as getting in the hands of a terrorist, right? I mean, nobody's really worried. It's like when Trump brought up nuclear weapons yesterday, everybody said, well, we don't really mean that. Like we may have it on the table, but we don't really mean they're on the table. So the threat's the terrorist threat, right?
I think so. I mean, when I evaluate the will and capacity, again, as a soldier, what I look at is who has the will, who has the capacity to use something like this, and why China, they do have, that kind of capacity. Do they really have the will as a nation state to do a preemptive launch against the United States? I don't see it. Now, when you look at ISIS and they actually believe that on their watch, they're going to usher in doomsday, the return of the apocalypse, and these guys get their hands on fission or nuclear materials, they'll absolutely use it. So I look at will and capacity, and I think the American people should do the exact same thing.
That's when it's scary. Colonel Mann, thanks. It's good to talk to you about this, though. Thanks for coming on.